Everyone in the valley laughed when Evelyn Carter refused to sell her grandfather's farm. They said her ancient flock of sheep was worthless, obsolete, a relic that had no place in modern agriculture. Her powerful neighbor gave her 1 year before bankruptcy. Then something unexpected happened. A mysterious disease swept across Montana, killing livestock on farm after farm. Millions of dollars vanished almost overnight. Ranchers panicked. Veterinarians couldn't stop it. Yet somehow, Evelyn's flock remained perfectly healthy. As fear spread through the valley, the people who once mocked her became desperate for answers. But what nobody knew was that behind the outbreak lurked a shocking conspiracy, one that would expose greed, corruption, and a secret hidden in her grandfather's herd for generations. A cold autumn wind swept across the rolling hills outside Bozeman, Montana. Gray clouds drifted low over the valleys, and the scent of dry grass and approaching rain lingered in the air. The final shovelful of dirt struck the oak coffin with a dull thud. Evelyn Carter stood silently beside the grave, her hands buried deep inside the pockets of her weathered brown jacket. The sound echoed through her chest far louder than it did across the small cemetery. Around her, neighbors offered polite condolences before slowly returning to their trucks. Within minutes, only Evelyn remained. At 31 years old, Evelyn looked nothing like the ranchers who dominated Gallatin County. She stood slightly above average height with a lean athletic build developed more from hiking than farm labor. Long, chestnut brown hair fell past her shoulders, usually tied into a practical ponytail. Her green eyes carried an intelligence sharpened by years of accounting work in Denver, but lately they seemed permanently shadowed by exhaustion. Caring for her grandfather during his final illness had drained her emotionally, financially, and physically. 3 years earlier, Evelyn had been living what many would call a successful life. She worked for a respected accounting firm, wore tailored business suits, and spent her weekends in coffee shops instead of cattle auctions. Then her grandfather got sick. Robert Carter had raised her after her parents died in a highway accident when she was 11 years old. He had taught her how to ride horses before she could properly ride a bicycle. He had shown her how to read weather patterns, repair fences, and judge a person's character by how they treated animals. When doctors diagnosed him with aggressive lung disease, Evelyn walked away from her career without hesitation. Now he was gone, and all that remained was a 120-acre ranch, an aging farmhouse, and a flock of sheep that the rest of Montana considered worthless. The drive back from the cemetery felt longer than usual. The Carter Ranch sat against the foothills west of Bozeman, surrounded by larger commercial operations that stretched across thousands of acres. As Evelyn pulled through the front gate, she immediately noticed the flock grazing peacefully on a distant hillside, the Silver Ridge sheep. They looked different from modern commercial breeds, smaller, leaner. Their thick silver-gray wool shimmered beneath the fading afternoon sun. Curved horns framed many of their faces, giving them an almost ancient appearance. Unlike most livestock, they moved with remarkable agility across steep terrain. Her grandfather had always called them survivors. Everyone else called them relics. As Evelyn climbed onto the porch, she noticed a black luxury pickup parked beside the barn. Her stomach tightened. Only one person in the county drove a truck like that, Victor Langford. Victor was 58 years old and towered over most men. Decades of ranch work had given him broad shoulders and thick arms, though recent wealth had softened his frame. His square jaw was covered by a perfectly trimmed gray beard. Expensive cowboy boots and custom-tailored jackets had replaced the worn work clothes he once wore as a young rancher. Many people admired Victor, many feared him, very few trusted him. Success had changed him over the years. What began as ambition had slowly hardened into arrogance. As his livestock empire expanded, so did his belief that every piece of land around him eventually belonged to him. Victor stepped from the truck and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "I'm sorry about your grandfather," he said. Evelyn folded her arms. "Thank you." Victor glanced toward the distant flock. Robert was a stubborn man. Evelyn remained silent. "He had heart, though," Victor continued. "That's rare these days." She could already tell where the conversation was heading. Victor removed a pair of leather gloves and leaned casually against the truck. "You've probably looked at the books by now." "Not yet. You should." His eyes drifted toward the grazing sheep. "Those animals are museum pieces." Evelyn felt irritation building. "They're not for sale." Victor laughed softly. "I didn't ask." The confidence in his voice felt rehearsed. "Listen, Evelyn, you're smart. Everybody knows that. You worked in finance. You understand numbers." He pointed toward the flock. "Those sheep belong in history books. The future belongs to engineered livestock, faster growth, better yields, higher profits." Evelyn looked toward the hills where the Silver Ridge sheep continued grazing without concern. "They've been supporting this ranch for decades, barely." Victor's tone sharpened. "My operation produces more revenue in 1 month than that flock produces in 5 years. Evelyn felt a familiar wave of frustration. People always spoke about profit. Nobody ever spoke about legacy. Nobody ever spoke about preserving something worth protecting. Victor opened the truck door and pulled out a folder. Inside sat a purchase contract. "I'll make this easy." He handed it toward her. "Sell me the ranch." Evelyn didn't even look at the document. "No." Victor blinked. "You haven't heard the offer." "I don't need to." His smile disappeared. For several seconds, neither spoke. The Montana wind rattled the dry grass between them. Finally, Victor folded the contract. "Then let me give you some free advice." His voice grew colder. "Within 1 year, you'll lose everything." Evelyn met his gaze. "I don't think so." Victor looked past her toward the aging farmhouse. "The property taxes alone will bury you." Then he pointed toward the flock. "And those sheep certainly won't save you." He climbed into his truck. Before closing the door, he leaned out one final time. "When you're bankrupt, I'll still be interested." The engine roared to life. Dust swirled behind the truck as it disappeared down the long gravel road. Evelyn remained standing alone. The fear was real. The uncertainty was real. She had no experience running a ranch, no guarantees, no safety net. But as she looked toward the Silver Ridge sheep grazing peacefully beneath the darkening Montana sky, she remembered something her grandfather had once told her. The world laughs at things it doesn't understand. For the first time that day, Evelyn felt something stronger than grief. Determination. And she had a feeling the valley was about to learn exactly why Robert Carter had protected those sheep for his entire life. The farmhouse felt unnaturally quiet after Victor Langford's departure. As darkness settled over the Montana foothills, Evelyn Carter sat alone at the kitchen table where her grandfather had spent countless evenings balancing ranch accounts. A single yellow lamp illuminated stacks of weathered ledgers, tax records, receipts, and handwritten notes that stretched back decades. At first, she reviewed the documents simply because she needed to understand the ranch's finances. Property taxes, fencing repairs, fuel costs, equipment maintenance, feed purchases during severe winters, everything appeared exactly as she expected. Then she noticed something strange. She frowned and flipped back several years, then 10 years, then 15. Her pulse slowly quickened. The veterinary expense column was almost empty. Most ranchers spent enormous amounts every year on vaccinations, parasite treatments, respiratory infections, lambing complications, emergency calls, and medications. Yet year after year, Robert Carter had recorded almost nothing. Evelyn grabbed a calculator. The deeper she dug, the stranger the numbers became. According to the records, neighboring ranches of similar size should have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 25 years. The Carter Ranch had spent less than 5% of that amount. That wasn't luck. That was a pattern. The next morning, Evelyn drove into Bozeman hoping to find answers. The local agricultural supply store sat near the edge of town. Inside, ranchers gathered around coffee machines discussing livestock prices and weather forecasts. Conversations noticeably quieted when she entered. She had become something of a curiosity. Most locals viewed her as an outsider despite growing up in the valley. To them, she was the former city accountant trying to run a ranch with sentiment instead of common sense. As she loaded fencing staples into a cart, a voice called from behind her. "Miss Carter." Evelyn turned. The man approaching wore a spotless denim jacket and polished boots that had clearly never touched mud. Dr. Kevin Brooks was 47 years old, tall and slender, with sandy blonde hair combed neatly backward and sharp blue eyes that constantly seemed to be evaluating people. His clean-shaven face carried an artificial friendliness that never quite reached his eyes. Years earlier, he had earned a reputation as one of Montana's leading livestock veterinarians. Success had brought influence, corporate partnerships, and increasingly close relationships with powerful ranch owners like Victor Langford. "My condolences about your grandfather," Brooks said. "Thank you. I hear you're keeping the Silver Ridge flock." Evelyn nodded. Brooks smiled politely. A brave decision. Something about his tone felt insulting. "They seem healthy enough." His smile widened slightly. "Health isn't always visible." He leaned casually against a display shelf. "Those sheep haven't followed modern vaccination schedules in years. Most responsible ranchers would consider that risky." Evelyn studied him carefully. "My grandfather raised them for decades without major disease problems." Brooks chuckled. "Sometimes people survive by ignoring reality. That doesn't make them correct." The comment irritated her more than she expected. "According to the records, we haven't had significant losses in over 20 years. For a brief moment, something flashed across Brooks's face. Surprise. Then it disappeared. "Records can be misleading." He handed her a business card. "If disease ever shows up, call me immediately. Emergency visits are expensive, but they're cheaper than losing an entire flock." After he walked away, Evelyn stared at the card. The conversation left a bitter feeling she couldn't explain. Later that afternoon, she stopped at the Gallatin County Library. If nobody in town would take her seriously, she would do her own research. Hours passed. Scientific journals replaced accounting spreadsheets. Genetics replaced financial reports. By sunset, her notebook contained pages of observations. Many heritage livestock breeds possessed traits that commercial breeders had sacrificed in pursuit of faster growth and higher production: natural immunity, environmental adaptation, disease resistance, hardiness. Modern livestock often required constant pharmaceutical support because decades of selective breeding prioritized profit over resilience. As she read, memories surfaced. Her grandfather had rarely called veterinarians. The Silver Ridge sheep lambed without assistance. They survived brutal winters. They rarely became sick. Maybe the old man had known something all along. That evening, Evelyn parked near the northern pasture and climbed a ridge overlooking the flock. The setting sun painted the hills gold. Below her, the Silver Ridge sheep grazed peacefully across rocky ground most breeds would avoid. An old ram stood watch over the flock from a small rise. His massive curved horns framed a scarred face earned through years of survival. He looked less like livestock and more like a wild animal that had chosen to remain among humans. For the first time, Evelyn began wondering if the flock represented something far more valuable than anyone realized. Unfortunately, the rest of Gallatin County seemed determined to believe the opposite. As darkness settled across the valley, laughter drifted from a neighboring ranch where several livestock owners had gathered for a barbecue. One sentence carried clearly through the evening air. "That city girl still thinks those museum sheep are special." The group erupted into laughter. Evelyn looked back toward her flock. She felt embarrassed, frustrated, alone. But beneath those emotions, something else was beginning to grow: curiosity. And curiosity was rapidly turning into conviction. Somewhere inside her grandfather's records and somewhere inside those sheep, a secret had survived for generations. She intended to find it. Spring arrived late in Montana that year. Snow lingered on the distant mountains long after it should have melted, and cold rain swept repeatedly across Gallatin County, turning pastures into muddy fields beneath endless gray skies. At first, nobody noticed anything unusual. Then the coughing began. One ranch reported several sick lambs. A neighboring operation lost dozens of sheep within days. Soon, rumors spread through every livestock auction, feed store, and county meeting hall. Animals across the valley were developing severe respiratory symptoms: high fevers, labored breathing, sudden weight loss. By the middle of April, panic had begun replacing confidence. For Evelyn Carter, the news felt unsettling but distant. Every morning she walked through her flock with increasing concern, inspecting eyes, noses, breathing patterns, and feeding behavior. Nothing. The Silver Ridge sheep appeared completely normal. In fact, they seemed healthier than ever. The lambing season had arrived, and newborn lambs bounded across the hillsides with remarkable energy. Mothers delivered without assistance. The old ram still patrolled the ridges like a silent guardian. Meanwhile, the rest of the valley was falling apart. The hardest-hit operation belonged to Victor Langford. One afternoon, Evelyn drove into town for supplies and passed several livestock trailers leaving Victor's massive ranch. The sight immediately caught her attention. Workers were transporting dead animals, dozens of them. By the end of the week, local radio stations began discussing the outbreak openly. Nobody knew the cause. Nobody knew how far it would spread. At the feed store, worried ranchers gathered in anxious circles. For the first time, Evelyn noticed fear in their eyes. That fear quickly turned into suspicion. People needed someone to blame. Unfortunately, Evelyn was different animals, different methods, different results. That made her an easy target. 3 days later, she entered Miller's Diner, one of the oldest restaurants in Bozeman. The conversation stopped almost immediately. Several people looked away, others stared openly. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. At a corner booth sat Victor Langford and Dr. Kevin Brooks. Both men watched her. Victor looked worse than she remembered. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. His beard appeared untrimmed. Months of livestock losses were clearly taking their toll. Yet his anger seemed stronger than his exhaustion. Dr. Brooks stood as she approached the counter. "Miss Carter." His voice carried loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Evelyn," she forced a polite smile. "Doctor." Brooks folded his arms. "Interesting situation we're seeing." She knew exactly what he meant. "It certainly is." Victor rose from his booth. His massive frame seemed even larger inside the crowded diner. "Funny coincidence, isn't it?" he said. Evelyn stared at him. "What is?" "The entire county is getting sick except your flock." Several customers quietly listened. The accusation hung heavily in the air. Evelyn felt heat rise inside her chest. "Are you suggesting my sheep caused the outbreak?" Victor shrugged. "I'm saying it deserves investigation." Brooks stepped forward. "In epidemiology, unusual immunity can sometimes indicate exposure." The statement sounded scientific. It also sounded dangerous. Evelyn immediately understood what they were doing: planting doubt, creating a narrative, turning public fear into public pressure. She left without another word. That evening she sat on her porch watching the sunset bleed across the mountains. Her mind replayed every conversation from the past week. People no longer laughed at her. They feared her, and fear was far more dangerous. A truck appeared on the gravel road shortly before dark. The driver introduced herself as Rachel Moreno. Rachel was a county agricultural inspector in her early 40s. She had olive-toned skin, dark brown eyes, and shoulder-length black hair streaked with early silver. Years of field investigations had left her practical, cautious, and difficult to intimidate. Unlike many local officials, she had built a reputation for honesty rather than popularity. She stepped onto the porch carrying a clipboard. "I thought you deserved a warning." Evelyn invited her inside. Rachel remained standing. "The county board held a meeting this afternoon." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "About me?" Rachel nodded. "Victor Langford and Dr. Brooks presented concerns regarding your flock." "What concerns?" "They believe your sheep may be connected to the outbreak." The word sounded absurd, yet Rachel's serious expression removed any comfort. The board authorized a preliminary investigation. Silence filled the porch. Evelyn looked toward the pasture where the Silver Ridge sheep grazed peacefully beneath the fading light. Healthy, strong, unaffected, and somehow that had become a crime. Rachel handed over several documents. "This isn't a quarantine." "Yet?" Rachel hesitated. "Not yet." The answer was enough. As darkness settled over the valley, Evelyn realized the outbreak was no longer the biggest threat facing her ranch. People were. And somewhere behind Victor Langford's sudden accusations, she sensed a much larger plan beginning to unfold. The moon hung low above the Montana hills, casting pale silver light across the Carter ranch. A cold wind moved through the grasslands, rattling fence posts and carrying the distant cries of coyotes across the valley. Evelyn Carter had barely slept for days. Ever since Rachel Moreno warned her about the county investigation, an uneasy feeling had settled deep inside her chest. Something about Victor Langford's sudden accusations felt calculated, too organized, too convenient. Near midnight, she finally drifted into a restless sleep. Then the barking started, not ordinary barking, warning barking, explosive, urgent. Evelyn instantly recognized it. The sound belonged to Ranger. Ranger was a 7-year-old border collie who had worked alongside her grandfather for most of his life. His black and white coat had begun showing streaks of gray around his muzzle. Though aging, his intelligence remained extraordinary. Robert Carter often joked that Ranger understood English better than most politicians. Years of guarding livestock had made the dog cautious, observant, and fiercely protective of the flock. The barking continued. Something was wrong. Evelyn grabbed her flashlight and rushed outside. The cold air hit her immediately. Ranger was sprinting toward the main pasture. Without hesitation, she followed. Her boots pounded against frozen dirt as she crossed the field. The sheep remained calm. That frightened her even more. Then she saw movement near the largest water trough, a dark figure. Someone was crouched beside the tank. The person appeared startled when Ranger charged forward, growling. Evelyn raised her flashlight. The powerful beam illuminated the intruder. A young man froze. A metal container slipped from his hands. Liquid splashed onto the ground. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then recognition struck. The man was Tyler Jensen. Evelyn had seen him several times working alongside Dr. Kevin Brooks. Tyler was 26 years old, thin and nervous-looking, with sandy brown hair falling across his forehead. His face carried the exhausted appearance of someone who rarely slept well. Years earlier, his father had lost a ranch during a financial collapse, leaving Tyler burdened with debt before adulthood. Since then, he had become known around the county as someone willing to do almost anything to keep a paycheck. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn demanded. Tyler's face turned ghostly white. His eyes darted toward the fence, then toward Ranger, then back toward Evelyn. The border collie stood directly between Tyler and escape, growling, waiting. "I can explain. Start talking." Tyler's breathing became shallow. The flashlight beam revealed several containers sitting beside the trough. Evelyn knelt beside one. A yellow warning label covered the side. Her stomach dropped. Biological material. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Tyler broke. Everything came pouring out. The investigation, the rumors, the county board. None of it had been enough. Victor Langford wanted certainty. Dr. Kevin Brooks had developed a solution. Tyler explained that Brooks had acquired cultures containing respiratory pathogens associated with the ongoing livestock outbreak. The plan was terrifyingly simple. Introduce the bacteria into the Silver Ridge water supply. Wait for the flock to become infected. Then use the upcoming county investigation as justification for emergency livestock destruction. With the sheep gone, Evelyn would be financially ruined. Victor could acquire the ranch for a fraction of its value. The confession left Evelyn speechless, not because she doubted it, because she suddenly understood how long they had been planning this. The outbreak had created an opportunity, and they intended to exploit it. "You expect me to believe Brooks ordered this?" Tyler nodded. Tears began forming in his eyes. He said nobody would get hurt. Evelyn stared at him. The statement sounded absurd. Thousands of animals across the county were already suffering. People were losing everything. "You brought disease onto my property." Tyler lowered his head, shame finally replacing fear. For several moments, only the wind spoke. Then Evelyn's accounting mind took over. Evidence. She needed evidence, immediately. She photographed everything, the containers, the labels, the spilled liquid, Tyler himself. Then she carefully sealed several samples inside storage bags from the barn. Tyler offered no resistance. He seemed relieved the secret was finally exposed. Back inside the farmhouse, Evelyn locked the samples inside an old freezer. Then she began making phone calls. Not to the sheriff, not to county officials. She no longer trusted anyone connected to local politics. Instead, she searched for independent experts. One name appeared repeatedly: Dr. Nathan Mercer, a livestock geneticist and disease researcher at the University of Montana. Nathan Mercer was widely respected throughout the western United States. In his early 50s, he possessed sharp features, steel gray hair, and calm brown eyes that reflected decades spent studying animal health rather than chasing political influence. Colleagues described him as stubbornly honest. Several large agricultural corporations openly disliked him because he regularly challenged industry narratives when scientific evidence disagreed. It took nearly 30 minutes to explain everything: the samples, the confession, the investigation, the suspected sabotage. When Evelyn finally finished, silence filled the phone line. Then Dr. Mercer spoke. His voice carried none of the skepticism she had encountered elsewhere. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, "do not let anyone near those samples." Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. "Why?" Another pause. "Because if what you're describing is accurate, this isn't just agricultural fraud." The scientist's tone darkened. "This may be a criminal conspiracy." As dawn slowly approached the Montana horizon, Evelyn stood at her kitchen window watching the Silver Ridge sheep grazing peacefully beneath the fading moonlight. For the first time, she knew she wasn't imagining the threat. Someone had truly come for her flock, and now she finally had proof. The sunrise over Gallatin County arrived cold and brilliant, painting the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies in gold. Yet beneath the beauty, tension gripped the valley tighter than ever. At exactly 8 o'clock that morning, a convoy of vehicles rolled toward the Carter ranch. Evelyn Carter stood on the farmhouse porch watching them approach. She recognized Victor Langford's black truck immediately. Behind him came several county agricultural vehicles. The investigation had arrived. Victor stepped from his truck wearing the confidence of a man who believed victory was only minutes away. Despite months of financial losses, his expensive clothes remained immaculate, his silver beard was carefully trimmed, and his cold eyes carried the same arrogance Evelyn had seen since the day of her grandfather's funeral. Beside him walked several officials. Leading them was Harold Pierce, a senior agricultural compliance officer. Pierce was a stocky man in his early 60s with thinning gray hair and deep wrinkles carved into his weathered face. Years of bureaucratic work had made him cautious and procedure-driven. He disliked controversy and preferred simple explanations to complicated truths. Unfortunately for Victor, things were about to become very complicated. Before the county vehicles could even reach the front gate, another convoy appeared from the opposite direction. Victor's smile vanished. 3 white university trucks rolled onto the property. Dr. Nathan Mercer stepped out first. The scientist looked calm despite the circumstances. His gray hair moved gently in the morning wind as he carried several sealed evidence containers beneath one arm. Behind him emerged an entire investigative team. Among them was Dr. Hannah Collins, a molecular geneticist from the University of Montana. Hannah was 44 years old, tall and slender, with dark auburn hair tied neatly behind her head. Years spent inside research laboratories had left her pale-skinned and soft-spoken, but her reputation within the scientific community was formidable. She had helped identify several disease-resistant livestock traits throughout North America. Victor suddenly looked nervous, very nervous. Within minutes, both groups gathered inside the ranch equipment barn. Evidence was presented: photographs, sample containers, Tyler Jensen's recorded confession, laboratory results. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Harold Pierce listened silently as Dr. Mercer explained the findings. The pathogen recovered from the water trough matched cultures originating from laboratory sources. It had not appeared naturally. Someone had deliberately introduced it. When Tyler's signed confession was placed on the table, silence filled the room. Every eye turned toward Dr. Kevin Brooks. The veterinarian's face lost all color. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Brooks broke. Years of carefully maintained confidence collapsed under the weight of evidence. He admitted everything: the false reports, the fabricated health concerns, the attempted contamination. Victor exploded with rage. "You idiot!" he shouted. The outburst only made things worse. Investigators immediately began asking new questions. Financial records were subpoenaed, communication logs were examined, business transactions were reviewed, and the deeper investigators dug, the uglier the truth became. Over the following months, state authorities uncovered a pattern stretching back nearly a decade. Victor Langford had quietly used legal pressure, false environmental complaints, manipulated property assessments, and corrupt partnerships to force struggling ranchers into selling valuable land below market value. Several family farms had disappeared because of those tactics. The investigation expanded, then expanded again. Eventually, federal agencies became involved. Victor's empire began collapsing piece by piece. Banks withdrew support. Investors fled. Lawsuits multiplied. By the end of the year, the largest livestock operation in Gallatin County was facing bankruptcy. Meanwhile, something extraordinary was happening at the Carter Ranch. Dr. Hannah Collins and her research team completed their genetic analysis of the Silver Ridge sheep. The results shocked everyone. The flock possessed several rare genetic markers associated with unusually strong natural resistance to respiratory diseases, traits that modern commercial breeding programs had unintentionally weakened over generations. News spread rapidly. Suddenly, the sheep everyone had mocked became scientifically valuable. Researchers arrived, veterinarians arrived, even ranchers who had once laughed at Evelyn began asking questions. The same people who had called her stubborn now asked for advice. The irony wasn't lost on her. 2 years later, the Carter Ranch looked completely different. The original 120 acres had expanded into more than 600. Research facilities stood where empty fields once existed. Breeding programs helped preserve heritage livestock from across the country. Students and scientists regularly visited Montana to study the famous Silver Ridge bloodline. One autumn afternoon, Evelyn stood atop a hillside overlooking her expanded property. The wind moved gently through the grass. Below, hundreds of Silver Ridge sheep grazed peacefully. Among them walked new generations descended from the same bloodline her grandfather had protected his entire life. A familiar truck climbed the hill. Dr. Mercer stepped out smiling. The final report was released today. Evelyn looked at him. And the breeding program reduced respiratory losses across participating ranches by nearly 40%. For a moment, she said nothing. She thought about her grandfather, the ridicule, the threats, the investigation, everything that had happened. The valley had once treated his flock like a joke. Now that same flock was helping ranchers survive. As the sun slowly dipped behind the mountains, Evelyn realized something profound. Her grandfather had never been preserving the past. He had been protecting the future. And the legacy that everyone once laughed at had ultimately become the thing that saved an entire agricultural community. Sometimes God's greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder from the heavens. Sometimes they arrive quietly through the wisdom of those who came before us. The world laughed at Robert Carter's old flock because it looked outdated, unprofitable, and insignificant. Yet while everyone else chased speed, profit, and shortcuts, he protected something priceless without fully knowing how important it would one day become. Perhaps that is how God often works. He places blessings in places that others overlook. He hides strength inside things the world calls weak, and he rewards those who remain faithful when everyone else walks away. Evelyn could have sold the ranch. She could have abandoned her grandfather's legacy. She could have listened to the voices telling her to give up. Instead, she chose faith over fear, perseverance over convenience, and truth over pressure. In our own lives, many of us face similar moments. Sometimes people mock our dreams, sometimes they question our values, sometimes doing the right thing feels lonely. But this story reminds us that not every blessing reveals itself immediately. Sometimes God is preparing something far greater than we can see. So if you're carrying a burden today, if you're fighting a battle nobody understands, don't lose hope. Stay faithful. Keep moving forward. Trust that God can turn even your hardest season into something meaningful. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoy inspiring stories about faith, resilience, justice, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and join our growing community. May God bless you, your family, and everyone you love. May He fill your home with peace, your heart with strength, and your future with hope. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.